Hello and welcome to another episode of the djproject Criterion Collection. And moving ever so swiftly, we get to Spine 64, The Third Man, directed by Carol Reed, 1949. This is another one of those films where everything about it just works wonderfully well. If you want to see great writing, great direction, great performances, great cinematography, great story, everything just really works together very well. I get a feeling that I've heard it described this way, but I kind of think of this as Casablanca for cynics, and it's certainly the post-war Casablanca. The whole story takes place in Vienna right after the war, and like Germany, it is also occupied by four major powers. It was in the opening narration bombed a bit. And by the way, that's from the original UK narration. There was a new version made for the US at its initial release, and it's here as a feature and as one of the features on the DVD. And I like the original better. It showcases that very dry British wit, and it really comes through in the dialogue. This is courtesy of famed writer Graham Greene, and just this is an example of razor sharp, very witty, what it needs to be, but certainly very colorful but very sharp dialogue. And if you want to see a really good example of that, especially in the wit category, it's great. I don't want to get too much into it because this is another one where you can dive into spoilers, so I'll try to keep it as more general as possible. But this has of course my high recommendation. I know some recommendations are more higher than others, but certainly if you like mystery, if you like film noir, and if you like just plain old-fashioned good filmmaking, it's definitely up the alley, as it were. As far as the major talents involved, the four headlining actors, Joseph Cotten plays Holly Martins, who's a pulp writer. Calls himself a hacker who has a drinking problem. Writes mainly westerns, and he finds himself in a mystery of his own. He goes to Vienna on the whim of a very good friend of his, but he finds out that this friend is dead, and so he bumbles his way in figuring out what exactly happened. But Joseph Cotten plays it really well. Alida Valli is also plays. Also, I really don't want to get into too many spoilers. And then of course, and Trevor Howard does a really good job. And then of course, there's the very famous Orson Welles, and there's been a lot that's been rumored about how involved he was in the production and did he influence it. But there is one thing that is a credit to him, and most famous for, and in this film, is there's a certain part where he says this: "You know what the fellow said? In Italy, for 30 years under the Borgias, they had warfare, terror, murder, and bloodshed, but they produced Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and the Renaissance. In Switzerland, they had brotherly love. They had 500 years of democracy and peace. And what did that produce? The cuckoo clock." A bit incorrect, because it actually doesn't come from Switzerland. It comes from Schwarzwald, but I digress. But it's just a brilliant little line, courtesy of Wells himself. But at any rate, yeah, it's just yeah, a lot about it is just really really good. Um, I said that this is kind of a Casablanca for cynics, and it's true. I mean, basically, if you like your romances cynical, if you like your attitudes of life very cynical, this is definitely the film for you. And maybe it's because it happened right after the war, and what a great time to be cynical, and um, and so on. So it plays in it really well. Um, Again, I don't want to talk too much about it because I'm afraid of giving anything away. I mean, it's that highly recommended. You just have to go see it yourself. But I guess I will say that it is unfortunately one of those titles that did go out of print. In fact, just when they were about to issue the Blu-ray, um, actually no, they had just issued the Blu-ray, and I think like a month or two later they had to immediately discontinue it because they lost the rights from Studio Canal. And this is a title that actually got reissued in 2007, and I did get it. I didn't get it right then and there because usually with these titles I like to prioritize how to get them. And as soon as I heard that that was going to go out of print, I immediately went and snatched up a copy because I knew I wanted it on my shelf. I knew I wanted to get it, and I'm glad that I did. So, but really, just track. I mean, the unfortunate thing is that I think you lose a lot of the features that Criterion had made for the Third Man. But really, just if you go and seek out the film for yourself, that's all you really need. I will say this about the film. This is the film that makes a lot of use of Dutch angles. And this may be, and I think there's a few other films, and particularly film noirs, that especially use Dutch angles. But this is one of those, but barring that, this is perhaps the only legitimate time to use Dutch angles that much. I know another film that made another infamous use of Dutch angles, and that was done in very poor taste. This one was done in very good taste. It was said by Carol Reed, the reason why he did it was to give the feeling of tension and suspicion. I also kind of look at it as a way of sort of subliminally suggesting that this is in the midst of a bombed a bit Vienna, and so there's ruins, there's buildings in disarray, and while it's for the most part fairly cleaned up, you could still tell that there's that war was ravaged there. Not as severely as in other locales, particularly in Europe, but still affected by the war. And by having those Dutch angles, which for anyone who doesn't know what that means, it's just basically just imagine this, or when it's not level. Carol Reed used it so much that his crew actually gave him a present by the end of the production, which was a spirit level. Right. But I do feel that this was something that was used appropriately, and it wasn't overdone. But there are definitely a lot of shots that use Dutch angles, and I think again it's to give that feeling of ease. I think it's also subliminal that it suggests a ruined city. I think it also, in a way, by giving the camera a different angle as opposed to just level, you're able to experiment a bit more with light and shadow, and definitely for the film itself and the story that it tells, it's very much a story about light and shadow, and so anything that can help express that is a great benefit. Another little thing that I like about it, in terms of the story, is that it achieves a balance between a contrived mystery. You know, obviously it's a constructed story, it's a constructed character, but it's also, it doesn't lose its, it doesn't lose a realistic edge to it. And it's interesting that the main character that goes through this mystery is himself a writer, and not just any writer, a writer of pulp fiction, and which is often characterized by its various contrivances and flat characters and so forth. So in a way, it's kind of it's a kind of tongue-in-cheek thing, and I'm sure this is something that perhaps Graham Greene was grinning at as he was writing this, to have a character who writes popular novels to be in this mystery that in some ways follows one of his novels, but also at the same time doesn't. And for starters, this is an American in a European city, and yeah, he does come off as bumbling, but he doesn't really lose sympathy. He's not truly pathetic. I mean, he bumbles, he fumbles and bumbles, but he doesn't, to me, come off as absolutely pathetic. In fact, one of the producers of the film is the infamous David O. Selznick, and when he, in turn, released the film in America, he wanted to cut down anything that made Holly Martin seem less sympathetic. So the alcoholism was toned down. Anything that made him less heroic. And I think it was a big disservice to do that, because it doesn't insult his character in any way, those things. I think it gives him a certain realism, which is interesting considering his profession. So, but yeah, even though the story itself is constructed, it doesn't feel like it's constructed. It has that nice balance of something that's well constructed and well crafted, and you can tell that it was well crafted, but also has the air of authenticity, that this really could have happened, what had happened. So yeah, all around a great film. I guess one more thing I can mention is this is a film that's also famous for its music. It is performed entirely using the zither, played by Anton Karas, who was a famed zither player in Vienna. And the legend goes that he was discovered there, and Carol Reed wanted to work with him right off the bat. And he had done some recordings, and they used those as a basis, but that he wanted him to do more. So they actually flew him into London to basically score the entire film using the zither. There was a somewhat recent article, editorial, talking about like the best film scores and also the worst film scores, and this was put into the worst film score. And I think it was because he was thinking, like, the zither, really? That's you're carrying the entire music just using a zither? And I would say to that, what it does, because this was, I mean, for the time, it was known that he was a zither player living in Vienna, and it gives that air of authenticity. But I think it also, as a player, I mean, it demonstrates the fact that you could carry a film using nothing but a zither, demonstrates that that a single instrument can be quite expressive. I mean, it's just like using a cello for everything, and cello has a certain range and not just in terms of notes, but also in terms of expressive qualities that makes it a very versatile instrument. And in this case, it's interesting what you can do with the zither. And I mean, it doesn't do everything. I mean, all instruments are limited, and the zither does have its limitations. But the fact that you're able to have it express different emotions that the story/films call for, and it was able to pull off, I consider that to be remarkable. And the fact that it went out of the norm. I can't hear any kind of traditional film score, including ones that are associated with film noir, like a jazzy score. I think the zither makes it work. The fact that he himself was from Vienna gives credence to the geography, and the fact that it's an instrument that you don't normally hear. It also fits well with the fact that Holly Martin's an American, is in a city where he can't even speak German. And that's another thing I really liked, was the use of language, that it drifts, it centers around English, but very often you hear lots of German. You even hear a smattering of Russian a little bit, but mostly you hear German. And there was no inclination to put any subtitles on, and the translations only happen sporadically. Sometimes Anna provides a translation, but often it's a very loose translation or a paraphrase of what was saying. But really, the language is left to be undecipherable. It's a way of getting, for starters, it's a way of getting you into the character who himself doesn't know German. So why should we expect it to know any more than he does? And again, it also gives it an air and authenticity of just letting the language and the situation play for itself, especially since most of it was filmed in Vienna, and there were Vietnamese there, and so again, it just gives it that air of authenticity. So great film, and if I keep talking, I may give something away. So if you haven't seen The Third Man, go check it out. It's a great film. It's a classic film, especially if you like mysteries, and especially if you like good films. It has all the elements working for it, and it's really, really enjoyable. So there you go, The Third Man. And until next time, take care.